Dames en heren, goedemiddag.
Hoi hoi, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 29 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. This is part 2 of our Borders and Belonging discussion. As with our last episode, we are joined by Joos Minnes with a special appearance from his girlfriend Nina. If you haven't listened to part 1, I definitely recommend giving that a listen before you jump right into this one. Otherwise, we hope you enjoy.
Let's go to chapter 3, the Belgian Revolution. So we've had chapter 1, the French Department, chapter 2, the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, and now this chapter 3, the Belgian Revolution. I talked to this about Lucy, and she said, I've never heard about Belgian Revolution.
Well, I've got no chance, have I?
You said, Lucy, I've only heard of the Belgians breaking apart from the Netherlands. The Belgische afscheiding.
Wasn't it me who told you that in Brussels I found a memorial on a beautiful classical place called the Martyrs Place, that there was a great monument dedicated to the Belgian Revolution, and that when I saw that quite a few years ago by now, I was surprised to see it called that. I'm not sure now whether it said revolution or liberation. That it was an uprising to free themselves from an oppressive regime. So a bevrijdingsoorlog, a war to liberate yourself. Yeah, that you could equate that to a revolution. Anyway, what this illustrates is that depending on from which side you look at a historical phenomenon, depending on the message you believe in, you will have different ways of calling it.
Right.
Yeah.
So is the Belgian Revolution called that by Belgian people or by people in Maastricht?
Well, I have to ask a very important question. When?
Oh. When it first when it first happened, which I don't know when that is.
So the Belgian Revolution happened in 1830. There was an opera in Brussels that was about revolutions and about bringing down the tyrant. After this opera, the people went on the streets and started shouting for revolution and started chanting songs from the opera. And this spark really ignited the Belgian Revolution, which was a kind of a velvet revolution in the sense of the Dutch king, so William I, did not want it.
Okay.
His son did not want it, but practically everybody else saw that it was inevitable,
Right.
that the Belgians would separate themselves from the North. I don't know if you remember the civil war in Sudan. A few years ago, there was North Sudan and South Sudan. Now there is North Sudan and South Sudan, and the old country of Sudan was separated into two very distinct cultures. And as an outsider, everybody saw it's inevitable that the South will break free from the North. Also because there is this ideology behind it. Yeah. Like we have this different culture, we have a different language, we have a different way of life. But the Belgians had always governed themselves as part of the Austrian Empire, but still they had governed themselves and they did not need the Dutch to tell them what they were doing. Yes. So I went to school in Belgium, you can have it.
Yeah, that shows.
But still then, what's very interesting is that we now separate the Belgians into Flemish and Walloons, but this did not happen back then. Everyone was called a Brabander.
Okay.
It was the Brabant Revolution because Brabant was the catalyst.
Yes, catalyst.
Yeah.
Catalysticos of the revolution, and the Belgian flag is formed after the heraldic colors of Brabant.
Okay.
And Flemish and Walloon only came in like 1840, 1850 and later.
Yeah. So at this point, Luxembourg is also part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands still. Yes. Do they have different feelings about it? They're just sort of tacked on the end.
Luxembourg was technically part. Do you know what a personal union is?
No.
A personal union is when the king of one country is also the king of another country, but that country governs itself, more or less.
Okay.
It's a little like a colony.
Yeah.
And when the Belgian, in 1815, at the Congress of Vienna, there was also erected something that was called the Deutsche Bund.
Mm-hmm.
No, the Deutsche Zollverein. And Luxembourg was part of the Deutsche Zollverein as a whole, which means modern-day country Luxembourg and province of Luxembourg in Belgium. So there's two Luxembourgs.
Okay.
The country and the province. And the country of Luxembourg, the people speak a German dialect, Luxembourgish, or Letzeburgish.
Yeah.
Belgian part of Luxembourg, the people speak French, or a Walloon dialect.
Okay.
And when the peace was signed between Belgium and the Netherlands in 1839, which was the Treaty of London. It's very complicated, in case you hadn't guessed. In 1839, it was decided that the German-speaking part of Luxembourg would remain part of the Netherlands in form of a personal union.
Okay.
But was also still a part of the Deutsche Zollverein. The Walloon-speaking, so the French-speaking part of Luxembourg, was no longer considered part of the Deutsche Zollverein and was added to Belgium. And instead of this part, so the French-speaking part of Luxembourg, the newly created province of Dutch Limburg was added to the Deutsche Zollverein, which we can still hear in the German anthem, which says "Von der Maas bis an der Memel." So from the Meuse to the Memel. Memel is in the east of Germany.
Okay.
And Lucy is nodding, no, you got it all wrong.
Well, we don't change the Dutch national anthem either, and that's also got lots of 16th century nonsense in it. So
I mean, the Australian national anthem is, we only sing the first two verses because the other verses talk about the motherland and all kinds of weird things, and no one knows about those ones. They're racist and all kinds of dodgy, so can relate.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yes.
Okay, so Luxembourg is complicated.
It's very complicated. So in 1830, just to go back to there,
Uh-huh.
Almost all of the Catholics in the United Kingdom of the Netherlands joined the Belgian Revolution.
Okay.
So this meant that the whole province of Limburg, which is nowadays Dutch and Belgian Limburg, joined the Belgian nation.
Okay.
So I believe you are in Heer now. You would have been in Belgium. So only the city of Maastricht remained Dutch.
And St. Peter.
Ah.
And St. Peter.
Which is where Katrina is.
Okay. So Katrina, you're lucky. You're also on Dutch territory in 1831.
Was not lucky.
No.
So the fortification of Maastricht was very important, and there was a Dutch general here who did not want the city to fall into Belgian hands, and of course every Maastrichter hated him. Many of them still hate him. His grave was erected on the way to the MVV stadium, the old MVV stadium, and
that's a soccer club, MVV.
Yeah, that's everybody knows that, right? You know, they're playing the first division.
So MVV is the Maastricht Soccer Club, and we are not getting into that now.
No, but when people went there, they always like to piss on this general's grave. That was a cultural thing.
It was a father to son tradition that was carried on through the generations, even though I have seen several instances of fathers not being able to explain to their sons at all what this pissing in this particular spot was all about. But, you know, that's what happens with cultural heritage too. It can completely lose its original meaning and still be considered of significance, which is interesting.
It's intangible heritage.
Yeah.
Well, best.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. back to Dibbets.
Yeah, so Dibbets kept Maastricht Dutch
Yes.
when the peace was signed. So there was war for, I believe, 9 days. Lucy, am I right?
Well, we've got a thing in our historiography that is called the 10-day campaign. So maybe there was
Yeah.
a war for 10 days.
And Maastricht was blockaded by Belgian forces, but it's not very clear how serious we should take this, because it had no real economic impact. Thank you, Nina. On the city, but it was still unpleasant, to say the least. But if you consider Gaza is blockaded for decades now, and they are still going strong,
Yeah.
people
Anyway.
couldn't go there. So Maastricht was blocked, but we don't know how serious we should take that.
What do you mean by not take it seriously, apart from the linguistic nonsense?
Because if there's a real blockade, then there are economic consequences. For instance, factories going bankrupt because there are no longer any goods that can be produced, major emigration from the city, starvation, things like that. And this did not really happen in Maastricht.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So there have been some. Well, I don't know how serious you should take it.
Okay.
There was this blockade, but then again, it was only the north of the city or only the west of the city, because there wasn't, as I said, the only people who did not see the inevitability of Belgium breaking apart from the Netherlands were the king and his son.
Okay. And so after that blockade, is that what happened? Is that when that happened? That Belgium separated?
No, Belgium separated in 1830.
Okay.
But in 1839, so 9 years later, only the peace was signed, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands recognized the country of Belgium. And that's also when the borders were signed. Redrawn, yeah. So this happens a lot. If there's a war of independence, then the country which becomes independent says we've become independent in 1950, but the country of which they have become independent from will say, no, you have become independent in 1956, because that's when the peace treaty has been drawn.
Yeah.
And this is always very silly to have this discussion with people.
Yeah.
And in the Netherlands, of course, it's always, for instance, Indonesia. In Indonesia, people will say we have become independent in 1945, but in the Netherlands, everybody will say Indonesia became independent in 1949 because there was a war. Yeah, and of course not everybody, but it's complicated.
Political orthodoxy.
Yeah.
I was in the cemetery of Maastricht this week, walking around with people and telling them about the place. And there is this memorial to the war in Indonesia, and it's been sort of gracefully done. They list the Second World War there as going from 1940 to 1950. Yeah, okay, you can do that. I told my guests the whole story anyway. But you don't want to have these conflicts over names in a burial ground. That would be preferable. Anyway, back to the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands breaking apart.
Yes. So in 1830, all of the province of Limburg became Belgium, except for Maastricht and St. Peter.
Yeah.
But then in 1839, the borders were redrawn. And Maastricht had to be Dutch because this was the northernmost city where you could cross the Meuse still, and Maastricht had this fortification, and it was still very, very important. And there had to be a corridor to Maastricht, and that is exactly what the Dutch province of Limburg is.
Okay.
It is a corridor to Maastricht, and it follows the Meuse up to the city, and then the Schootsveld, so
The range.
The range of the fortification became the border. So that's about 5 kilometers, because a cannon could reach 5 kilometers.
Okay.
And then back to the east, the old borders, that became Dutch. And the rest of the province of Limburg became Belgian. So that's why we now have 2 provinces of Limburg.
Ah, okay. It's interesting that some of the borders are so sort of people talking and deciding things, and they're sort of willy-nilly-ish. And then some of them are, the cannon can go this far, we'll put it there. Some of them are so practical.
Yeah.
But this is what diplomacy is very often about. It's extremely practical. If you look at a map of the city as it is today, especially the maps where everything on the other side of the border is represented as a grey area, you can see this very clearly. How on the western side, the border between the Netherlands and Belgium is a funny sort of almost zigzag shape. And that is because they were measuring exactly from the fortifications what the range of the cannon, plus a few meters extra, because you wouldn't want those bombs right on the border. What that was, and that was drawn in, and it's and this, considering that a very short while after those cannon became obsolete anyway because they tore down the fortifications, is just one of those ironies that history is full of.
And what effect did it have on the people? I mean, becoming part of the Netherlands and separating from Belgium, and I don't know, especially for people down here where they're so close to the border, did it make a big difference in their lives, or was it sort of a formal thing that didn't really impact them as much as you would think?
I have spent a few years at the provincial government of Limburg. And then you can see up close the rather astounding difference after all these decades between the practical life of actual people and the reality of politics and administration. From the meeting hall of the provincial estates, so the democratically elected representatives on the provincial level, you can see Belgium. At the same time, every time the right-wing majority in the provincial government is strong, they will do away with everything in the field of trans-border cooperation. Yeah, the border is practically on their doorstep, but let's not deal with that. In real life, the connections across the border are so, to this day, are so intense, so manifold, so varied, that loads of people will live in a way as if this border doesn't exist. Yeah. This comes with a heavy penalty, because the moment you can pretend to do that, but you will run smack up against all the rules and regulations that are attached to the border. And I have had this creeping suspicion for years that in this way the physical border may have disappeared. There are no longer barriers and soldiers, let alone soldiers with weapons. All of that has been done away with within the context of the European Union. At the same time, it seems as if these national capitals, often very far removed from these borders, will not take into consideration what life is like in these regions on both sides of the border, and keep constructing higher and higher walls of convoluted and conflicting
bureaucracy
regulations. And you saw it especially now in the corona pandemic, when national authorities were choosing different types of measures, and all of a sudden we had conflicts at the border again. And only because family members wanted to see each other, and that's so that is something that has not gone away at all. Even though in the post-World War II period, a few generations have actually lived in the illusion that this sort of nonsense might get less, but it hasn't.
Well, I've said that before, that I've noticed it a lot as someone who lives in St. Peter, very close to the border. It's a 20-minute, half-hour walk to the border in Cannes, and it was never visible to us until coronavirus happened, and they put a log so cars couldn't go past, and they put, I don't know if they felled a tree. It wasn't an official barricade. It was a log and cones and things, but people still rode their bikes and walked, but you couldn't park. But because we do live on the border, people were parking their cars on this side and walking to their friends, their workplace, etc. on the other side. And I know people, if they had to go to Germany for work, like masks would be compulsory everywhere, but they weren't here. And so I think you're right that coronavirus has really amplified and made that very visible, as particularly to me, living sort of quite close to the border.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is only the latest instance of this, seemingly paper reality of treaties and regulations and laws, conflicts with the 3D reality of people's lives, and it's something you keep experiencing in border regions. Makes life interesting.
But what's very funny is the use of money. Because now, of course, we all have the euro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember my parents always having 3 wallets with them.
Yeah.
One with Belgian money, francs. One with Deutsche Marke, and one with guilders.
Yeah.
And I think it was only from the 50s of the 20th century that it became normal to pay in guilders in this region, because beforehand it didn't really matter what money you used.
Okay.
I remember on the market of Maastricht, mostly the Friday market, you could pay in Belgian money.
Wow.
And you could get back Belgian money, and people just didn't care at all. And that's typical for border regions, that they don't live on this side of the border or on that side of the border, but they live really on the border, which means they live in 2 countries at the same time.
Yeah.
And they watch television from 2 countries, and they get the news from 2 countries. I know people from Maastricht who, as they think of the king, think of the Belgian king. So this thing in Dutch, nu valt het kwartje, which means now I've got it. And in Maastricht you don't say nu valt het kwartje, you say nu valt de franc. Now the franc falls. Which is the same saying, but we didn't have kwartjes here. So we use the word franc.
Yeah, it's sort of like the penny drops, but you wouldn't say
penny
that
drop.
because you don't have pennies either.
No, so you use another coin that also drops.
Yeah. So at what point did Maastricht start identifying either as itself or as part of the Netherlands? Did that ever happen, or because I know in our discussions we've sort of, we talk about how Maastricht is in landscape and in a lot of ways more similar to the south than the north. So does it identify that way?
So the big breaking point is 1914.
Okay.
With the First World War. The Germans declared war on, the Austrians declared war on the Serbians, and then the Russians declared war on the Austrians, and then the Germans declared war on the Russians, and then the French declared war on the Germans. That thing. And then the Germans decided they should go through Belgium to conquer France. And it was only when the people from Maastricht saw how, as a historian, there's lots of things you are taught, and one of these is the so-called rape of Belgium. When the people from Maastricht saw the rape of Belgium in the First World War, they suddenly saw, wow, if we were Belgium, then this would have happened to us as well.
Okay.
So there's this eyewitness from Visé, which is the city most close to the Belgian city most close to Maastricht, which says that when the Germans attacked it, from every house there was a white flag, and from every house there were flames. And when the River Meuse turned red from the blood of the people of Liège, that's when the people from Maastricht thought, okay, we are so glad that we are not Belgian right now. We are so glad we are Dutch. It really was a war that started this feeling of Dutch nationality.
Okay.
And even then, there's still, I think, with that the Belgian sentiment went away. But as you know, the people from Maastricht and the people from Limburg still have this distinct identity from the rest of the Netherlands.
Yeah.
At any rate, I'm not so sure about this identity stuff. I think it is not anything factual apart from it being an historical process, so something developing over time.
I think it's very fluid, and it obviously changes, and
every
single person is probably different, and
it is there is a lore attached to it, and convictions and preferences and behavior and loyalties, but that is all subjective experience we choose to share with each other. And of course that can greatly assist in your sense of identity. But I think even on a personal level, identities are in flux over time.
Yeah.
I can recognize aspects of myself from going back, and I can also see how much things have changed over the years, and I think for anybody with any kind of self-awareness that would be the case, and the same thing applies to groups. So it is an interesting phenomenon to look at. But for instance, this way of the one term as an example, this habit that we have in Maastricht of self-describing as Burgundian. So being like the Dukes of Burgundy and the civilization that they stood for.
Yeah.
That is a 20th century invention. There was a reporter from Holland, I think, who fell in love with Maastricht and stayed here for most of his life, which quite a few people who are not born and raised here do, and have done for decades, and they're quite welcome. I am not of the school that if you are not born and raised within the first walls, you are not allowed to call yourself a Maastrichtenaar, but of course that's because I'm not born within the first set of walls. Anyway, this sort of thing. I think this is a very good example of how identity can be constructed. I mean, the factual connection between this region and the contemporary people in this region with this Duchy of Burgundy, which led to the reign of the Habsburgs. But the Duchy in itself lost all significance here when? 16th century, a long time ago. So, it is, let's talk about it as a process of identification. And then aspects of that are, of course, the sense of place and the language and the experiences you share, the procession of the sauvage and the hoisting of a Maastricht when carnival is open. The language and the songs and the jokes and all of that.
What I find very interesting nowadays is that people think they can have only one identity.
Oh, yes.
When in fact, of course, you can have many identities. It really depends on who you're with and what your social role is, what identity you take on yourself. I think that's something people tend to forget these days, that you can be Dutch and Swedish and Russian and Japanese at the same time.
Well, I'm sure maybe Nina she might probably has more thoughts about it because she has different identities. My mother is Australian and my father is Scottish, and so I didn't grow up in Scotland, but that is definitely part of my identity as a person. So I definitely understand, and even and on the minutiae of things, like I grew up on the coast, so I'm like a beachy Australian. Like I didn't come from the bush, and so I know that there's sort of it's nuanced as well as being like multiples. And
the word I am thinking about is multi-layered.
Yeah.
Where it is not so much connected to identities derived from nation states, which is, since those states are of course very much made up things, is always unsure grounds, but the layers of, identifying with Maastricht and identifying with the Meuse-Rhine region. I am more at home in Aken than I am in The Hague, where I have lived for 10 years. As a feeling, of course I know my way around The Hague a lot better than I do around Aken, because I have not lived in Aken for 10 years. But, when it comes to a sense of recognition, just recognizing your surroundings, of having a grasp of where you are. Aken is much more familiar. As an example, same goes for many of the Belgian cities than the Holland cities are to me. They feel much more alien, even though, it's my country. I also strongly identify as a European, and this is fed to a large extent in my case, that is not the case with quite a few other pro-Europe people, but is fed by what I know about history and about how this continent has fared over the centuries. But also, of course, experiences of seeing historical monuments in one part of the continent that were totally recognizable to me from another part of the continent, because there's the same strata of architecture, of significance, of, I can read those places. I understand what they mean. If I would be dropped in a city in India or in China, that wouldn't feel that way. It would be fascinating, but I wouldn't have a clue. So that's apart from different nationalities being fused in an identification process for one person. There's also this aspect of more layers to it, and the layers point to geographical extensions. Because of course with the internet we all become globally aware at the very least. So that's the latest edition.
Well, we have Nina back with us. We were just talking about multi-layered and multiple identities and how they are often layered, and particularly I think in Europe, where you have multiple European backgrounds. How do you personally sort of identify with and sort of connect those things?
It's very difficult in my case to say that I identify myself through my cultures, because I've never really had this thing, okay, I identify as German or I identify as Dutch or Bulgarian, because in Germany in school I was always the Dutch girl. And then in the Netherlands with my family, I was always the German, because my mother was a bit looked down on that she went to Germany and all that. So you never really okay, where do I belong? And then especially not in Bulgaria, because that part is still in my home, but not really in my life so much. So I really started, my identity is not with the country I grew up in or the culture I had at home. And then it's funny that when I came to Maastricht 2 years ago to study here, that changed a bit, because then Maastricht was finally a place where I do feel at home and I do identify with, maybe also because it has so many different influences from France and Belgium and Germany. Yeah. Also, maybe for the first time, some place where I really feel at home. Yeah. Because there's also, of course, a lot of international people coming here, and through my studies, I meet a lot of other people, and some of them have the same ideas that I don't identify myself through my nationalities, but more through who I am as a person. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well,
as you see, it was very relevant to bring Nina.
So funny talking about multiple identities. When I come from a psychology background, I keep thinking multiple identities. That's when you have a split personality.
No, nothing pathological.
Not that kind of multiple identity.
No, nothing pathological there. Just it is creating your own sense of self and of belonging.
Yeah.
And the way you are describing your allegiances, or in particular the criteria you use to set your allegiance, makes me very, very hopeful that the bad effects of nationalism might be wearing off in Europe. That would be good. But when you look at European decision making at the moment, that is absolutely not the case.
When the Second World War was over, the mayor of Maastricht had a speech in 1945. This was very, very forwardly of him to speak of two types of Maastricht people who, according to him, guided the city through these hard times. And he spoke of Maastrichtenaren van geboorte of van overtuiging.
Yep.
Which is very beautiful, I think. It says so. Maastricht people either from birth or from persuasion, or conviction.
conviction.
And I think if I think that's something people from Maastricht should do, to persuade others to also feel Maastricht.
Well, in my experience, they generally need very little persuasion from us. I see so many Maastrichtenaren by choice from all over the world. It is just heartwarming. Once in a while, I get a little embarrassed when I hear people from elsewhere singing the praises of my town. But of course, it does mean I don't have to do it, which is, because you look like a chauvinist right away, and I don't want to. Anyway,
I do.
I think we've been chewing ears off for long enough. What do you think? Have we covered more or less the themes we thought we should address, or is there anything left that we definitely should look at?
Any questions?
That's the next step, Hughes. We will be having live broadcasts, and people can ask questions. Anyway, thanks a lot again. Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, thanks to you and Nina for joining the Meet Maastricht podcast.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you can be of service the next time as well.
Thank you so much for listening to the Meet Maastricht podcast. To keep up to date with all our content and events, make sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Meet Maastricht and on Facebook at Come Meet Maastricht. If you love our podcast and would like to see some amazing archival images as you listen, don't forget to subscribe to the Meet Maastricht YouTube channel. If you love what we do and would like to support the Meet Maastricht team, you can also donate through PayPal via our website meetmaastricht.eu. Meet Maastricht is definitely a labour of love, and all of the revenue we make through our tours and events currently goes towards administration costs. With your help, we would love to be able to give back a little something to the team so we can all keep bringing you our favourite stories and showing you our favourite places in Maastricht. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.